Today's episode was brought to you by Skillshare. What is going on, SoloFam? My name is John Solo, and welcome to Fables Explained. If you haven't seen the show before, basically what we do here is break down the often messed up original stories your favorite fairy tales are based on. If you are a returning fan of our little series, then you should know that last week I covered the movie Shrek and the story that inspired it by William Steig. You guys seem to love it, so today we're discussing another character that the Shrek franchise brought to the big screen, Puss in Boots. While absent from the first film, the Master Cat was featured prominently in the sequel. First hired by Fiona's father to kill Shrek because he didn't approve of their marriage, the assassin ambushes the ogre and donkey in the forest, only to end up in a rather vulnerable position where Shrek has the option of sparing his life. Finding it difficult to kill something that's so friggin' adorable, Shrek lets him live, and as a result, Puss owes him a life debt. Over the course of the movie's events, he helps out Shrek in a number of ways, including stealing the happily ever after potion and fending off the guards, while Shrek races to prevent Fiona from kissing Prince Charming. Due to the audience's overwhelmingly positive response to the character, DreamWorks went on to release a Puss in Boots spin-off film, which was also positively received by audiences and critics alike. To my disappointment, that spin-off film, which is ironically an origin story, has basically nothing to do with the actual origins of the character, and his supporting role in Shrek 2 far better exemplified the traits and story elements from the original tales that we're discussing today. Before we dive into that though, I want to give one more shout out to one of my favorite services out there, our sponsor for the past few weeks, Skillshare. For the literally 6 of you watching who don't know what Skillshare is, it's essentially an online school where you can learn all kinds of life-improving skills. Classes on everything from podcasting to Photoshop to lucid dreaming to cooking can all be found on their platform, and the courses are taught by highly qualified experts in each respective field. Some courses are even taught by YouTubers, which is especially dope. The best part is a Skillshare membership only costs $10 a month, which is well worth it for what you can learn there. And to sweeten the pot, they're offering the first 500 of you who sign up through my description link a 2-month free trial so you can try it without risk. To those interested, claim it while you can. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to today's subject of discussion. As always, make sure you smash that like button so we can hit our 10,000 like goal for the 4th week in a row. Pretty awesome how much you guys are killing it, I must say. And subscribe with notifications turned on so you never miss another episode. So the lineage of the Puss in Boots story is an interesting one, with roots that go all the way back to the year 1550 when its original version was published in a book called The Facetious Knights of Straparola. Written by Giovanni Straparola, this is considered to be the first European storybook to contain fairy tales and served as inspiration for later fairy tale authors like the Grimm brothers. It was a multi-volume collection of 75 different fairy tales, and like many collections back then, contained a story within which the fairy tales were being told. Structurally, it's very similar to the 1001 Arabian Nights collection as well as the Pentamerone, 2 books we've discussed in the past. Now, the fairy tale that would serve as inspiration for Puss in Boots was called Constantino Fortunato, and it followed a young man whose mother dies and leaves him with only a cat and nothing more. No money, no food, no property, nada. Meanwhile, his older brothers are left with a trough for kneading bread and a board for making pastry, and they refuse to share either with poor Constantino. Normally, I would go through this story line by line with you, but it's almost identical to the 1697 version by Charles Perrault, which is actually the version most people know the character from. The 2 biggest differences are the setup, which we just went over, and the ending, which I don't yet want to spoil. So after we go through Perrault's version, known as the Master Cat or Puss in Boots, we'll compare this ending to the one that inspired it, as well as unpack a few interesting details, like why Perrault felt compelled to give the cat boots. An intriguing question, right? Well, you're gonna have to watch to hear the answer. Yeah, I'm pulling one of those. Moving on to the story itself, it also starts with the death of a parent. This time it's a father who leaves his oldest son a mill, his middle son a donkey, and the youngest son a cat. This is what we call primogeniture, when the right of succession belongs to the firstborn child, meaning they get first dibs on basically everything their parents leave when they die. We also touched on this in my video about the Pied Piper, which I recommend you check out if you haven't yet. While the youngest son is sitting there complaining about how the only uses for his cat are one halfway decent meal, yes, he means eating it, and turning its skin into a muff, The feline overhears this and decides to speak up. It says, "Worry not, my good master. All you gotta do is find me a large bag and some black boots, and you'll find that you're far better off than you realize." The master was doubtful, but he saw how many cunning tricks the cat played on mice to catch them and figured it was worth the gamble. He gets the aforementioned items, and afterward the cat went to the woods, caught a rabbit with his bag, killed it, and brought it to the nearby king as a gift, which he graciously accepted. Puss continued to do this for the next 2 or 3 months, hunting small game like rabbits and partridges and gifting them to the king, saying every time they were from the Marquis of Carabas. Or at least I think it's Carabas. I know it's not Carabas because that's Carabas. So Carabas it is. One day, when the cat knew for certain that the king would be taking a drive along the riverside with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, he told his master to bathe in the river and leave the rest to him. Things are about to get interesting. When the king's carriage rolls by, Puss calls out for help, saying his master is drowning, and when the king sees who it is, he sends some men over to help him. While they were pulling him out of the water, Puss told the king that his master's clothes had been stolen by some rogues, when in reality he just hid them under a rock. Nevertheless, the king, who was grateful for all the previous gifts he received, gave the Marquis one of his finest suits. Because the Marquis was handsome and well proportioned, Perrault's words, not mine, the suit fit him perfectly and the princess fell in love at first sight. The king then offered to bring the Marquis to wherever his castle might be, and the cat said he would lead them there. Now you're probably wondering where this cat is going to get an entire castle from, and that's a good question. But first, let's talk about the journey there. To no surprise, the cat had a few tricks up his sleeve. He ran ahead of the carriage and once out of sight, told some nearby peasants to tell the approaching king the meadow they were mowing belonged to the Marquis of Carabas. Oh, and he also added that if they didn't, he would cut them into mincemeat. To be perfectly honest, I don't know how I'd react if a cat told me that. Every time the king stopped to ask who the peasants were working for, they would answer the Marquis of Carabas, and he was impressed with the seemingly endless estate. Finally, Puss reached a large castle, which just so happened to belong to the richest ogre in the land, who also owned all the property they had just passed through. The cat stopped by under the guise of, "I couldn't possibly travel through your land without paying the proper respects," and the ogre greeted him with open arms. Feeling comfortable, Puss then asked him, "I heard you have the power to turn yourself into any creature you want. Is that true?" And the ogre said, "You betcha," and showed off this power by transforming into a lion. Puss was immediately terrified of the beast and said, "Well, is it also true you can turn yourself into the smallest of creatures as well?" And the ogre said, duh," and turned himself into a mouse, which Puss then proceeded to jump on and eat. I gotta say, he's lucky the mouse didn't turn back into an ogre after he died, otherwise we would have had the reverse of this situation, and that wouldn't have been pretty. Shortly after the ogre was dealt with, the king's carriage approached the castle. Puss let them in and then gave them the grand tour. Just by coincidence, a magnificent feast was waiting for them in the grand hall. You see, the ogre was initially expecting company, but when his friends saw the king's carriage sitting outside the castle, they skedaddled. The group then had a delicious dinner where the king got very drunk, revealed his admiration for the Marquis, and followed it up with, "If you don't become my son-in-law, it's your fault." The Marquis took this opportunity to propose and married the princess the very same day. The couple lived happily ever after, and the cat went on to become a great lord who never again chased mice out of necessity, but instead only for entertainment. And that, my friends, was Perrault's The Master Cat, or Puss in Boots. Pretty weird story, right? Or at the very least, a unique one as far as fairy tales are concerned. The reason I say this, and you may have already noticed it, is there isn't an evident moral. You've got this useless character with basically no valuable qualities outside of his appearance, yet thanks to this lying, deceitful cat, he ends up with a castle full of riches and a beautiful spouse. It's kind of like someone wrote a fairy tale about an Instagram model with a really good agent. Despite that though, Perrault did manage to tack on a moral. 2 actually. The first one says it's beneficial to receive a large inheritance, but diligence and ingenuity are worth far more than the wealth acquired from others. And the second one says if a miller's son can get a princess to fall in love with him at first sight, it must be due to his clothes, appearance, and youth. I mean, yeah, those are both true, but what makes them weird morals is the character still got all of his success through lying, and it wasn't even justified lying. They straight up threatened and murdered characters that didn't deserve it, so it sort of muddies the life lesson there. What's interesting is that Straparola's ending isn't much better from a moralistic point of view. The cat leads them to a castle that's still owned by someone else, but the universe gives them a deus ex machina, a solution that comes out of nowhere. The castle's actual owner just dies while he's off picking up his new bride, and the main character gets to keep it. Shortly after that, the princess's father also dies, and the kingdom's citizens choose Constantino to be their next king, since he won the heart of the princess. What luck for Constantino, right? And once again, the lead character does nothing of value the whole story, while the cat is the ultimate bro. I guess if you wanted, that could be the moral. Be the ultimate bro, or sis, or whatever. I would just ask that you do it honestly, that's all. Now before we move on to the archetype section, I want to address a common misconception about Puss in Boots that some people may have already left some angry comments about. You see, Perrault's Puss in Boots was published in 1697 in his own collection of fairy tales called Histories or Tales of Past Times. Only the book and story titles were both in his native language of French and weren't translated to English until 1729. There's many people who believe his inspiration for this story wasn't Straparola's version like I said, but instead another Italian story called Galeazzo, which came out after and was included in Giambattista Basile's Pentamerone. It's a sensible conclusion to reach because the Pentamerone was published after Straparola's book and before Perrault's, but there's one important detail that often gets overlooked. According to Iona and Peter Opie, two of the premier folklore scholars whose work I've referenced often throughout this series, the Pentamerone wasn't translated from Italian to French until after Perrault had already written and published Puss in Boots in 1697, so it's unlikely he would have read it beforehand. Contrariwise, Straparola's Facetious Nights was translated from Italian to French back in 1560, meaning it would have had a well-established presence in France by the time Perrault wrote his book or was even born. Now, I don't want to say it's impossible for him to have been influenced by the Pentamerone because I wasn't alive back then, I don't know for sure, but when you consider all the facts, it definitely doesn't seem as likely. Nevertheless, I do want to go over Basile's version because it's a very good story and just as ridiculous as the last two. Once again, we follow a main character whose parents have died and left him with nothing but a cat. He's pretty bummed about it, and out of pity, the cat agrees to make him rich. The cat, who this time is female, wastes no time putting her get-rich-quick scheme into action, and the ensuing hijinks are very similar to the previous ones we've discussed. Phase 1, give the king some gifts. Phase 2, finesse some fancy clothes from the king so her master has something to wear when he meets him. In Phase 3, convince the townspeople to tell the king the land they're working on belongs to Lord Galeazzo. After the king is convinced of Galeazzo's wealth and status, he is insistent that the young man marry his daughter, and for a wedding gift, gives him a big pile of cash. Continuing to follow the cat's advice, the extremely rich Galeazzo used that cash to buy himself some property, and if he wasn't such a scumbag, he would have lived happily ever after. But you see, the newfound one percenter wanted to express his gratitude for the cat's help, and said that whenever she died, God forbid, he'd have her embalmed, get her a golden casket, and place that casket in his own room for the rest of his days. The cat appreciated these kind words, but she was skeptical, so the following day she laid motionless in the garden to trick her master into thinking she was dead. When his new wife found her body, she called out to him saying, "The cat's dead, honey. What do we do?" And you're not gonna believe his response. Galeazzo says, "Devil die with her. Better she than we. Take her by the leg and fling her out the window." Take her by the leg and fling her out the window. Hilarious mental image aside, like, come on, dude, I treated my webkins better than that. Naturally, the cat is furious. She stands back up, calls out her old master on being a useless, ungrateful ragamuffin, and says his face isn't even worth spitting on. Then, if her words are to be taken literally, she places a curse on everything he gained from her help and storms off, never to see him again. Intense ending, right? It sucks for the cat, but I will say it's nice that Galeazzo got what's coming to him, because you know after his wife heard this go down, he had some splaining to do, and I can't imagine she stayed with him after that. Hopefully the cat learned her lesson too, which from where I'm sitting is something like the old give a man to fish, teach a man to fish adage. In addition to their setup and endings, another important difference between Perrault's version and Straparola's and Basile's was the addition of boots, which you might say is pretty random, but there's some fascinating reasoning behind it. See, back in Perrault's day, over 300 years ago, people didn't have easy access to fly kicks. Shoes had to be made by a cobbler and were expensive. Therefore, attaining a pair symbolized climbing the social hierarchy. It sounds kinda crazy for run-of-the-mill shoes to be worth that much social currency, but it's just a less evolved version of people in modern society saying, what brand is that? Only brands didn't exist to that degree, so it was just, you have shoes. That's dope. Because children outgrew their shoes so quickly, they often wouldn't own a pair until they were older, so receiving shoes would mark an important time in a person's life where he or she was grown up and ready to fill a role in society. If you were an adult without shoes, others may have looked down on you. They could have refused to do business or even socialize with you. A simple cat having his own boots and being given an audience with the king is exemplary of how much weight people put on how you dressed yourself and the opportunities you would be given by doing it properly. So I guess that does tie in with Perrault's moral about how your appearance actually matters. As much as people like to complain about impossible beauty standards nowadays, the reality is the standards of society's past were just as difficult to reach and maintain, while the consequences of failing to do so were much harsher. I think that's something we could all stand to remember. Now let's talk about the Arndt Thompson Uther Tale Type Index. For those who are just watching for the first time, this is the official system used to classify folk tales by their archetypes. If you don't know what archetypes are, they're recurring themes, characters, events, and plot structures that appear in all kinds of stories. Puss in Boots is no doubt the best known story that fits in the ATU 545 category, the animal as helper. It also has its own subcategory, 545B, the cat as helper. There's one last story I want to share with you before I go that also fits in that 545 category, a fable called Don Joseph Pare. It's far less well known and was written in 1870 by Italian author Giuseppe Pitre. The reason I want to talk about this version is that while again it's very similar to the past several we've discussed, its setup, ending, and even the animal helper are not. For starters, instead of parents dying being what starts the main character Joseph's adventure, it's pears being stolen off a tree. In response to this heinous crime, he stays on watch one night and catches the culprit, who happens to be a fox instead of a cat. When he's about to shoot her down, she begs him to stop and promises that if he spares her life, she'll have him called Don Joseph Pare and he'll marry the king's daughter. Joseph figured, what's the harm? If she comes back, I'll just shoot her again, and what ensues is another master plan filled with lies and deceit. The fox bribes the king with gifts, steals fancy clothes to make Joseph look rich, threatens the townspeople so they lie on his behalf, kills an ogre, and in the end, he winds up with a castle and married to a princess. But the story doesn't end there. Like Galiuso, instead of showing his animal friend the respect she deserves in exchange for all of her help, one day while hanging out on the terrace, Joseph throws some dust on her head. Naturally, this irritates her and she's like, really my guy, after all we've been through, how about you don't do that again, or I'll tell your wife the truth about you. It's a very real threat, but for some reason Joseph just had to push it and threw even more dust on the fox's head. I mean, how petty can you be, really? Well, the fox wasn't having any more of it. She flips and starts blurting out all the secrets Joseph would never want his new wife to know, and in a panic, Joseph picks up a nearby jar, throws it at the fox's head, and kills her. The worst part is, the ungrateful piece of human garbage continued to enjoy his wealth and wife for the rest of his days, and on that somber note, the story ends. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the shockingly immoral origins of Puss in Boots. What do you think? Comment your thoughts down below, and like always, I'll be reading and responding to as many as I can. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other animal as helper stories that we didn't get to today, so I'm thinking somewhere down the line I'm gonna revisit this category and share some more of the fables with you guys. There's actually quite a few tale types I'd like to do that with, so if that's something you would be into, let me know. As always, Solo fam, if you like this video, let me know by smashing that like button, and if you haven't already, then subscribe and ring that bell to have more content about your favorite legends and fairy tales delivered to your sub box on a regular basis. And if you want to stay updated on Messed Up Origins news, what projects I have in the pipeline, or offer me a suggestion, then follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Handles are right in front of you and links are down below. Oh, and one last time, I want to give a big fat thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring the show over the past few weeks and helping the Solo fam learn some new tricks. If you haven't taken advantage of the 2-month trial they're offering us yet, this could be your last chance, so consider signing up after this video. I'll be seeing you again next week in the first ever episode of Mythology Explained. Until then, my friends, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.